Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if it's your first time coming across one of my videos. And I am the mature exotical lady, and this is episode 3 of a series of talks in which I talk about high functioning autism and how it affects young girls, women, ladies, females, however you would like to describe the our gender. And in the last series, I spoke specifically about how I identified with the traits that are commonly associated with higher functioning autism, known previously as Asperger's, in women. Okay. But I thought what I would do now, actually, before I go on to talk about ways you can self-diagnose or test yourself for whether you are actually showing traits for autism, higher functioning autism, I thought I would talk a bit more actually about the traits, because there actually are a lot of traits. 33 have been identified by an author who I like to read. Her name is Lydia Andell, and she is a former journalist, and she has a special interest in the issues of autism and how it affects adults. And she wrote a book called Am I Autistic? And it's a guide to help people self-diagnose. And so I get a lot of my information about how to, when I was looking at whether I was on the spectrum, I got a lot of my information from her books, because she's done more than one. I found this book particularly helpful because what it does, it gives a general list of traits that are non-gender specific as well. And I thought that would be really useful for me to sort of go through those traits. So there are 33 of them. And so how I propose to do this is to cover 16 of them in this episode, and then cover the remaining 17 in episode 4, before I then go on to talk about what the resources are available for women, young ladies, or young people, young females who would like to consider, first of all, how they can assess themselves for this disorder, or, they can decide if they want to sort of seek out more independent professional help. And I should say at this point that I'm not a professional. I'm not a medical professional at all. I am a lawyer by background, and I purely come at this subject from a point of view of somebody who is personally affected, somebody who believes that I have family members who are affected, and in general an interest in this subject, having read up on it and also having worked in mental health services professionally in the past. So with that said, let's start with looking at number 1 of these traits that is identified, and that is the synchronization of different senses. And when we're talking about the synchronization of differences, we're talking about, in this trait, audio and the visual. So the ability to see and the ability to hear at the same time. Okay, so higher functioning autistic people can have this difficulty processing simultaneously input from audio and visual channels. Okay, so if they are watching a television show, for example, with the sounds and with sounds, yes, and images, these will appear out of sync, out of timing with one another. And this is thought to happen because the two senses send competing instead of complementary information to the brain. So some people with audio-visual synchronization difficulties will actually prefer to watch the TV with subtitles, as this uses only one sense, as opposed to having to worry about hearing and seeing at the same time. And my youngest daughter is like this. She loves to watch a program if she can with subtitles on, and I noticed that she'd been doing that since she's very young, actually. Yeah, she's been doing that since she's very young, and I like to do that as well. As long as they're reliable subtitles, because they're not always reliable, but when they're reliable, I do like to have on the subtitles. So obviously that's not possible in social situations when you're having a conversation with people, okay? And obviously this can cause people to struggle to follow the flow of a conversation when they are listening to somebody, directly in person. And in situations like that, it helps if people can, almost lip read, or, sign language helps as well, But yeah, the autistic person, they would need to try to learn, and it's very difficult for them, but they would need to try to deal with understanding people's body language and facial expressions, as well as the content of what somebody is actually saying, so it is very difficult. And on the competing side, on the other side of this is if the stimuli is removed, all right, so if you're on the spectrum and actually you're not in a situation where you have to struggle with trying to listen and hear at the same time sometimes, then you can actually find certain high functioning autistic people would have really sharp powers of observation, or what they would call autistic perception, in the area where they are most strongest, so it's almost like they would have enhanced sight, privileged sight over and above somebody who doesn't have autism, or sound sensitivities. So they could be extremely sensitive to sound, and that could be both positive and negative, obviously, So yeah, so that whole thing around those two particular senses of sight and sound can be problematic for autistic people. And as I'm talking about high functioning autistic people. And something I have noticed about myself is, and this, I wear glasses, by the way, so does my my youngest daughter, and I've got a son who is supposed to wear glasses. All of us diagnosed with needing glasses in our childhoods, but when it comes to sight as well, and I mean, I'll talk more about this when I get to that particular trait of sight, but my visual perception is very strange. I have to I've noticed ever since I was a child, my head, I can't seem to look at the television or anything with my head straight. I have to have my head lean towards the left almost, and it's almost as if I'm giving you the side eye. And when I was a child, and this has been a problem because people would think that I'm giving them a dirty look, called like, oh, you're giving me side eye, and I'm not. It's almost like that is how my eyes make sense of what I'm seeing, and I don't do it on purpose. I mean, it literally, I would start out looking straight ahead, and then I would end up drifting with my head slightly to the left. And it's something I've always done it. And I never knew why. And I now believe it is, again, to do with my my vision, but not just because I need glasses, but because of my autism, effectively. I do believe that, yeah. So coming to number 2, attention to detail and perfectionism. So people can often experience that the way they pay attention to the tiniest of details can be problematic. It could be a good thing and a bad thing, really. So I mean, the benefit of this traits are that it's found in individuals at the higher levels of science and engineering and the creative sectors like IT. And this trait is extremely desirable to employers, and they will actually seek out, they've been known to actually seek out recruiting for highly technical roles from people who have this trait. And in the book I mentioned, Lydia actually talks about a large firms, including Freddie Mac, for example, and I think Freddie Mac is a mortgage provider, something to do with housing in the US, for any US viewers who might be watching this video. But they actually were known to have launched a program specifically to recruit higher functioning autistic people as software analysts due to their ability to spot tiny errors in large pieces of code, So that trait, that that zoning in on sort of detail. And again, I have a son who's like that, and I can be like that, not in a sort of scientific sense, certainly when it comes to preparing my work, and paying attention to that fine detail. On the flip side of this, though, this level of attention to detail is that obviously it can make us or people on the higher functioning spectrum extremely pedantic. Let's be honest, and that's going to be much to the annoyance of friends, family and members and colleagues, as they become so focused on detail that they sometimes don't see the bigger picture. You know what I mean? And also, you can spend excessive amounts of time on the fine detail, time that you just don't really have available to you, So that's a downside of this. And obviously related to the attention to detail trait, perfectionism, and that obviously feeds into this wanting to sort of get this fine detail and pay attention to this sort of small problem. You want to get it right. This perfectionism is often found as well. It's sort of combined in high functioning autistic people, and again can lead to great success in their chosen field or area of interest. And again, it can lead to great disappointment on the flip side, when the perfectionist can lead to perfectionism anxiety. It can create anxiety in people who might just not feel that it is actually perfect enough, And sometimes you might feel like you don't even want to, if you don't feel you can get it as perfect as as you want it, you might not bother at all. It can lead to complete sort of performance stagnation. Yeah. So that's those are sort of number 2. Number 3, communication differences. So an overview of the key communication differences found with autistic people. Yeah. Directness. Okay, being very direct, not really keen on small talk on topics outside of their area of interest, and may not see the point in saying 10 words when one will do. So can be extremely direct in social and work conversations. Also, social faux pas, as we say. So, people on the higher functioning spectrum can say things in a social setting that the prevailing culture dictates should typically be left unsaid. And I think I spoke about that in episode 2, where I spoke about how I could sort of find myself in situations where I would say things that I didn't really need to say, but I just felt I needed to say something, not really reading the context or the the social environment that I was in at the time. I've got better with time, though. Monologues is like one-way conversations where you will literally just carry on talking about your own special interest in great detail, and and not really having an awareness of the fact that actually you're the only one literally talking now about this subject that you are, sort of in awe of yourself, and not really being able to read that other people are actually bored at this point. They're not really interested in what you're saying, just not being able to do that. But that particular trait, what they say is that with time, you get better at that. I think all these traits, okay, around communication, with time, people on the higher functioning spectrum, they get better because with practice, you become more apt at understanding what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, over familiarity, and this is absolutely one that I have found myself in that sort of situation, and we sort of sometimes misunderstand that, but essentially it's where you can feel as if you're starting a conversation on the basis that you're too forceful with people, you're acting boundaries, if I put it that way, sort of boundary breaking, really, over familiarity, not really following the sort of usual codes of getting to know a person, even in a situation where you're just going to a social gathering. There is a process to how you engage with people, as well as obviously a process to how you make friends and build relationships on a longer term basis. There's a process. And with people on the higher functioning spectrum, they don't understand that process. It takes a while for them to understand that process, This is particularly for females, I would say, as well. I think less so for males, who tend to be more socially awkward, so would present as more reserved by virtue of their awkwardness. But certainly, sorry, with females. And also that could be linked to some extent to sort of being over formality as well. So some people can be rather rigid in their communication style, which makes them appear very formal and wooden in social settings, And that, I would say, would fit in with the sort of male awkwardness, aloofness almost, dry humour, some might say as well. So it's a trait which is greatly misunderstood as people who are in quotes normal or neurotypical people, if I was to use that term, can often misinterpret this as a sort of formal unfriendliness, and they might reject the person because they feel that they're being awkward, cold, a bit harsh, So yeah, so being or coming or appearing to be rather formal, and that would be the sort of way you come across in every setting. Literally, there would be no. There would be no changes from one environment to the other, regardless of where you are, if it's in a professional setting or a social setting. That same sort of formal way of dealing with people. Yeah. And then idioms and literal thinking. So this is another trait, and this is all linked to communication. Yeah. So some autistic people interpret instructions and common turns of phrase literally, and I think I spoke about that as well. So the phrase "an eye-popping delight" used to describe a piece of art can cause distress in some, who will literally see eyes popping. You know what I mean? Like they will literally see in their minds an eyes popping, out of somebody's head, say, for example, and that could cause them distress within themselves, So, yeah, but again, it's one of them things that as the person gets older, they understand that, or they learn to develop and understand that actually, when I say eye popping, it's just a term used to describe a situation as opposed to a literal somebody's eyes popping out, So, yeah. Communication communication differences in social exclusion. So this is, I think, number 4. So the above autistic communication differences are common causes of the rejection of autistic people, right? So the communication difficulties, both in the workplace and in social settings, and the rejection itself can make it really difficult in making friends, and people become social isolated, really. You know, social isolation comes into play because people are rejected, or they feel a lot of anxiety as a consequence of reactions to them in the working place or in a social setting, you know. And so eventually you feel socially excluded, or you are socially excluded, and then you can become socially isolated for fear of the judgment, or from others, and then that in itself leads to loneliness, anxiety and depression. And they have actually found that loneliness, anxiety and depression are disproportionately high in high functioning autistic people who haven't actually managed to successfully integrate themselves into mainstream society because of these communication difficulties, you know. Yeah. And then again, number 5, linked to communication differences or cultural differences, you know. Thinking about this, it could be said that a lot of the above communication differences are simply cultural, and that can be the case. And I think I touched on about how some of the issues I identified in myself could be cultural, as well as linked to difficulties because of being Asperger's, as I would I've referred to myself, you know. And autistic people, you know, they don't understand, and they tend to be direct and formal. And that doesn't mean, it's an impairment to, it's not an impairment to them. They're just being like, they're communicating the way that they can communicate, okay? But because of social norms and expectations and rules around how people should socialize is different, you know, to how they would present in a particular setting. Yeah. But again, that's contextual, because that might be in the UK, for example, but then in some other countries, that sort of aloof, formal approach, harshness is common. I mean, often people talk about Japan, for example, as a country where, and most of sort of Asian countries linked to Japan, China, Korea, you know, countries like that, where people actually could be, and also Russians can be quite stoic in the way they present themselves, you know. So it can be that it appears to be communication differences, or depending on where you are, could be just simply cultural, or could be treated as cultural differences, in which case it would lead to a better understanding of people on the spectrum if they were treated more as if these were people who presented as culturally different. Because then there probably would be more tolerance and acceptance, a willingness to understand, rather than judgment, and treating them as different because of their developmental traits, you know. So yeah. Number 5, difficulty understanding the concept of time. And this is something I've struggled with. And I think this is to do with executive functioning skills as well. You know, time management. Yeah. So people can have immense difficulties developing a sense of time. This can materialise in many different ways, and can lead to having difficulties in scheduling their workload, prioritising important tasks, or may turn up for an event at the wrong time, or even the wrong day. But there are ways that people can manage this, and you can learn, and I certainly had to learn to manage my anxieties around this, because it's extremely anxiety provoking when you are having to organize yourself to be somewhere on time, to get something done on time. You've got a lot of things to organize, and it can become really, you can have panic attacks. You can start sweating. You can feel so nervous. You can almost there's times I felt really nauseous just trying to organize myself especially when my children were small, and to be somewhere on time, and really worrying about what people would think if I was late, because lateness was something that used to scare me a lot. I'm, often just making it on time. Well, you can imagine with with 4 children, it wasn't easy. Sort of get 4 children organised, get myself organised, and then certainly when I went into law, prepare myself and everything I needed to prepare in order to be able to sort of leave the house and get to my destination on time with everything I needed organised. It used to be really stressful, honestly, very stressful. People completely misunderstand, I think, sometimes how stressful that is for somebody who is on the spectrum, and because you don't want people to know that you've got this problem, because it's, you within yourself feel it's embarrassing, you feel that people will see you as less able because of it. What I did, let me speak for myself, I have never wanted to in my sort of career, professional or social situations, present as if, or sort of disclose that I feel I have this problem, because you do feel judged by others, and that is something that I will talk about in a completely another episode in the series. Yeah, but anyway, I better sort of rush through these because of time. Number 6, I think. Distinctive gait, unusual walk. So the way that autistic people on the higher function is, I think this is in general, regardless of, but obviously differing degrees, but autistic people have a very distinctive gait walk, which involves walking in a very light, bouncy way, almost on tiptoes. Many autistic adults have learnt to tone down the way they walk, following ridicule and not to stand out. And this happens from an early age. I mean, I'm heavy-footed, and I have got my feet sort of walk sort of slightly inturned, but I'm very aware that I'm heavy-footed. I'm heavy-handed generally and clumsy, but I think that's all part of traits as well. Echoalia in speech. So again, this is not something that I've experienced myself, but again, Echoalia is around repetitive, verbalizing verbal repetitiveness. So in autistic people, when a phrase or accent is repeated by the autistic person after they hear it on the TV, radio, or in overheard conversation, sometimes without any real understanding of what the phrase means or the context in which to say it, they might just keep repeating it. I mean, that is for rather severe autistic people, I would say. In autistic adults without learning difficulties, Echoalia might seem to materialise in a conversation when they enthusiastically repeat a phrase said by other persons without actually responding to it or adding any further comment, This is one of the more obvious traits that most people will recognise as signalling that a person is autistic. So specifically zoning in on higher functioning autistic people, repeating phrases in conversations that they don't really sort of expand on, yeah. Probably almost like you're taking a photograph of that word. You're almost like verbally taking a photograph of what someone else has said for a reason, though. I would normally, when I'm doing that, when I used to do that, and I still do it now, but I would do it because it's probably a word I haven't heard before, and it's a word that I'm wanting to add to my vocabulary, and it's like almost I'm taking a picture of it, so I'm repeating it as a way of taking that snap. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and look it up. That's what I do. That's one of the things I've done quite a lot in my adult life. Yeah. Excitability, absolutely. Excitability, one of the common traits is excitability, hyper excitability. And obviously this is what has also led to some misdiagnosis for autistic people. And I think I'm now on number 8. I'm not sure. I'll list them in the description below. But yeah, a sort of like energetic burst. And this trait, if it's mixed in with depression, can get people can be misdiagnosed with having sort of bipolar almost, because you could be really sort of like overexcitable, and it can materialize in sudden energetic behavior which seems inappropriate or out of context to the situation at hand. For example, bouts of sudden and unexpected laughter, a sudden display of impromptu gymnastics around the room, or an overly enthusiastic response to incredibly trivial matters. I do this at home when I get really excited about something. I don't know, I might just even be in a really good mood. I'll just sort of get up and start dancing or doing something, talking to myself and doing stuff. I don't know. In my mind, I know why I'm doing it. But if you were looking at me from the outside, you'll just think, oh my God, what's she doing? But I must say, it's something that I'm aware of, and I will do this when I would need to be comfortable around people, or I'll be on my own. But it's not something I would do anymore if I'm sort of out in a social situation, just impromptu like that. What I can do, what I did notice I used to do is if I would mimic, going back to what I said in the second episode, I would mimic people. So if I was in a social gathering, for example, and there was a particularly rowdy group within that gathering, I would sometimes notice that I would veer to that louder group, and then I would start to mimic that loudness, I don't know why, they would be laughing, making jokes, and I would start to sort of mimic that, even though I don't know why I'm doing that, literally, there'd be no reason for me to do that. But I don't know, maybe I was just thinking that because they appear to be the most social people in the gathering, and in order to sort of like fit in, I need to sort of go and mimic those people. Maybe that's what I was thinking. I don't know. And so that's excitability. Yeah, but again, it makes you very vulnerable as well. It makes you very vulnerable. Very vulnerable. And then a further trait, high-pitched or monotonous tone of voice. Yeah. Yeah, so I think I've got a rather monotonous tone of voice. It's become more expressive over the years, but my voice is quite deep, and I think that's quite common as well. Monotone, yeah. So it's most autistic adults speak normally. Some speak with a high-pitched melodic tone of voice, or conversely an extremely flat robotic-like voice. Like most autistic traits, no one really knows why this is, but the end result is that the tone of the voice is not likely to convey their feelings or emotions in a way that other people are likely to easily understand. And I mean, that just reminds me so much of my mum. And I spoke about that in one of the episodes. I think it was the first episode. Where she would just be very sort of my mum was extremely monotone and completely unexpressive in all situations. Her presentation was the same, consistent throughout, regardless of the circumstances. Whilst it seems to be incredibly difficult for behavioural therapists to alter this trait if present, many autistic children, for example, go on to develop a more varied tone of voice as they learn to emulate the traits of non-autistic people with age. And that's true. you know. And I think it makes it very difficult for high functioning autistics people who have this trait. It's difficult to read something and get people engaged, get people to sort of like feel the experience through reading, you know, because if you've got a really monotone sort of approach to reading, for example, right, it's not going to be exciting. That's something I found when I was reading stories to my children. I think, oh God, I hope they don't find this too boring, because you know, I used to try and sort of like go up and down, you know, right, you know, the different tones in my voice, and to try to match the description of the story. You know, I used to try to do all that as best I could, but I don't know if I was very successful at it, you know. Anyway, another one, I think we're on about 10 now. Literal interpretations and difficulty understanding idioms. And I think I've sort of touched on that. Yeah, so basically taking things literally, you know. Autistic people have a tendency towards literal thinking, or concrete thinking, it's known as well. Which means that expressions, idioms like "I've got a frog in my throat" can be extremely alarming for some. Yeah, and at this point, I'm going to continue in a next episode to talk about these traits, because my time recording is coming to an end. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down and subscribe, and I shall see you in the next episode coming right up, where I will actually start again with this trait, which is literal interpretation.